So when it comes to President Trump, he is a truly amazing phenomenon. Whatever you think of the substance of his views or whatever you think of how he governs, I don't think we in this country have ever seen anything like him. And to be honest, I hope we never see anything like him again, because I don't think it's healthy for democracy. His way of governing in a liberal democracy like the United States, in my view, is dangerous.
国际关系现实主义学派的旗手，进攻性现实主义理论的创立者米尔斯海默教授再次以他一贯的直言不讳，在一档英国电视台的最新专访中抛出了一系列新的震撼观点。这位芝加哥大学的政治学教授数十年来始终坚持用冷酷的现实主义视角解读国际政治。在这次对话中，他毫不客气地指出，特朗普政府的外交政策很难描述，甚至认为特朗普看起来像拜登 2.0。 更引人深思的是，米教授对乌克兰战争的判断，他认为俄罗斯注定要赢得这场战争，西方越是支持乌克兰，反而会让乌克兰失去更多领土。在中东问题上，他更是直言不讳地称，以色列是美国脖子上的信天翁，阻碍了美国的全球战略布局。但这个访谈里最让我意外的，或许是他对美国民主制度前景的悲观。他认为美国正面临着自内战以来最严重的政治危机，民主的根基正在受到侵蚀。这样的观点注定会引发争议，但这正是米教授一贯的风格，用现实主义的手术刀毫不留情地剖析当今世界的权力游戏。让我们来看看米教授的完整访谈。
I think he's too old, and I think his health is at a point where another term is not possible. Sometimes things don't work out well, and the great fear here is that American democracy will be undermined at its core.
Could I start just on the state of the world at the moment? Where do you fit in Donald Trump's foreign policy into your worldview of realpolitik? It doesn't really seem to have a great rationale behind it.
Yeah, it's very hard to describe exactly what President Trump's foreign policy is. I mean, as you remember, when he ran for president, he portrayed himself as the peace president. And since coming to office, he's been anything but a peace president. I mean, he declared war against Yemen. He attacked Iran. He's been a firm supporter of the Gaza genocide, and with regard to the Ukraine war, which he promised to shut down probably before he moved into the White House, but certainly right after he moved into the White House, he's failed on that front too, and he basically continues to support Ukraine. So you could make a very good case that if anything, he looks like Joe Biden number 2.
You think that supporting Ukraine is the wrong thing to do?
I think that we should go to great lengths to bring the Ukraine war to an end as soon as possible, because I think the Russians are destined to win that war, and the longer it goes on, the more territory Ukraine will lose and the more Ukrainians will die. I think there's no way that the West can help Ukraine rescue the situation. In other words, I don't think the West can help Ukraine stem the tide on the battlefield. I think Ukraine will just lose more territory, lose more men, and I think that would be disastrous for Ukraine. So my view is we ought to shut down the war now.
You did think did say that President Putin did not have territorial ambitions to take over all of Ukraine or to destroy the government there. I mean, that was wrong, wasn't it? I mean, he clearly does want to do that, and that's why many people feel that if there was a settlement now, it would simply be a pause for Russia to regroup.
No, I think, Adam, that you're wrong. And I think the problem is you have to distinguish what Putin was saying before the war started and then what happened once the war started. Anybody who has studied war like I have over a long career understands that once a war starts, you have escalation. You have escalation not only in terms of the means that are used to fight the war, but you have escalation in terms of goals. And my argument has long been that before the war, there was no evidence that Putin was interested in conquering territory in Ukraine and making it part of a greater Russia. But there's no question that once the war got going, and especially after the negotiations in Istanbul broke down in April of 2022, that Putin began to think in terms of capturing territory. And I personally believe that the longer the war goes on, the more territory he's going to want to conquer. In other words, if the West continues to push hard in favor of Ukraine and against Russia, it will incentivize the Russians to take more territory, to take places like Odessa, Kharkiv, and so forth and so on, because the Russians will understand that NATO is never going to quit fighting against Russia, and therefore it makes sense for Russia to control as much Ukrainian territory as possible.
But that is awarding an aggressor who in objective terms is considerably weaker than the NATO West.
Well, if Russia is weaker than the NATO West, why is Russia winning the war and the NATO West in deep trouble?
Well, it's not exactly winning the war, is it? But also, as you well know, the West has held back from full involvement, and that's one of the things Donald Trump has done.
Well, what do you want to do? Fight a war? Or is that your argument that what the West should do is become engaged in the fighting?
Well, there are some people who believe that if there was greater Western commitment, for example, the deployment of troops in Ukraine, that would be a deterrent, although it could lead to a war. I mean, why desert Ukraine? I mean, that's the point I'm making.
I'm not talking about deserting Ukraine. I'm talking about getting the best possible deal for the Ukrainian people. If you accept a settlement now, there's no question that Ukraine is going to lose a substantial portion of its territory, probably close to 25% of its territory.
And it will be a buffer state that couldn't join NATO, couldn't join the European Union. It would effectively be a puppet, would it not, of Russia?
I think that's basically correct. But the question is, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? To continue fighting? You, I don't think, can tell a story. You, in the generic sense of that term, you can't tell a story as to how we can help Ukraine rescue the situation. We don't have the weaponry to give the Ukrainians, and furthermore, weaponry is not their principal problem at this point in time. Their principal problem is manpower, and we certainly can't solve the manpower problem. And furthermore, President Trump is slowly but steadily divorcing himself from this conflict and shifting the burden to the Europeans. And there's no way the Europeans are going to reverse the tide. So I'm basically arguing here, Adam, that you have a choice between two bad alternatives. And I believe the least bad alternative is to settle now.
I was just really trying to put this into your theory of great powers, right? And if you think that the United States is withdrawing from Europe, doesn't appear to want to take on China. It appears to think that China can have its sphere of influence, provided the United States has its sphere of influence. From the perspective of here in the UK and in as part of the continent of Europe or off the continent of Europe, what is the future for us? Are you saying the future for us is simply Russian domination?
Well, let me make a couple points. First of all, I do believe the United States is firmly committed to containing China in East Asia. And I do believe that we want to pivot fully to East Asia. And we've been unable to pivot fully to East Asia because we're pinned down in Ukraine and we're pinned down in the Middle East. And that is not in our national interest. But I think China is a peer competitor for the United States, and we want to deal with the Chinese above all else. With regard to Europe, we have no vested interest in being in Europe. Russia is not a threat to dominate all of Europe. As you've surely noticed, they've spent the past 3 years just trying to conquer the eastern 1/5 of Ukraine. the idea that this army is the second coming of the Wehrmacht and it can conquer all of Ukraine, then conquer territory in Eastern Europe and eventually be on the beaches of Dunkirk is not a serious argument. This is not that formidable an army. And furthermore, Putin would be crazy to invade Western Ukraine because he would run into huge resistance. So the idea that Western Europe, or Europe more generally, is going to be left vulnerable to Russia, this great Russian juggernaut, is not an argument I think that is correct.
I mean, it's not how the Poles or the Finns or the Secretary General of NATO see things.
I fully understand that, but they happen to be wrong.
Okay, let's talk about the Middle East. You say it's entanglement and the United States doesn't have any interest in being there. Should it, therefore, simply carry on as it's doing at the moment, which is permitting Israel effectively to do what it wants?
I think that the United States has a vested interest in making sure no country dominates the Middle East. And I was always in favor of having some sort of rapid deployment force that could be moved into the region if necessary. I'm not in favor of deploying large numbers of troops in the Middle East at this point in time because there's no serious threat to dominate the region. Our policies in the Middle East today are driven in large part by Israel. And in my opinion, Israel is an albatross around our neck. And we should not be supporting Israel the way we support Israel. We should treat Israel as a normal country. But that's not possible here in the United States. We support Israel unconditionally. And the end result is that we've gotten involved deeply in the genocide in Gaza. We have gotten involved in wars that Israel is waging in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Iran as well. And this is not in our national interest.
So what could be done?
The United States should treat Israel as a normal country, and we should immediately put an end to the genocide in Gaza. We have the capability to do that. If we made it clear to the Israelis that continuing the genocide was unacceptable and we'd punish them greatly if they didn't stop it, I can assure you they would stop it. And furthermore, we should go to great lengths to improve our relations with the Iranians so that the Iranians don't acquire nuclear weapons, and we should work to maintain stability in the region. And the most difficult obstacle to stability in the region at this point in time is Israel, no other country. The idea that Iran is the great destabilizer in the Middle East, I think, is not a serious argument. It's Israel that is.
I mean, Britain and France, as you know, appear to be on the brink of recognizing Palestinian statehood. Is that something that you think is wise or relevant even at this stage?
I think it's a good thing, but I'm not sure it matters very much because the United States and Israel, and you know they act as a tag team, the United States and Israel will just brush it off. They won't pay it serious attention. And of course, the United States has been going to great lengths to get the British and the French and others not to recognize a Palestinian state. But I think it is a step in the right direction. But what I'd like to see happen more than anything else is for the genocide in Gaza to stop.
What do you think?
I'm horrified.
What do you think is going to happen to Gaza? Is it going to be turned into a Riviera?
Well, I think what's going on here is that the Israelis want to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They want to drive all the Palestinians out. And I think they thought that initially they could use military force to hit the Palestinians hard enough that they could drive them out by the end of 2023, maybe early 2024. But the Palestinians have not left. No other country is willing to take the Palestinians in. And again, the Palestinians do not want to leave. And the end result is that the Israelis continue to use military force to inflict massive punishment on the Palestinians, all in the hope of driving them out. But the end result is that it's morphed into a genocide.
In that context, and what you said about the closeness of Israel with President Trump and President Trump's closeness, Where do you see the symbolism of this second state visit, this so-called historic second state visit by the president to the UK this week, with lots of talk of a special relationship?
You mean the Israeli president?
No. I meant the visit by the president, President Trump. He's coming on a second state visit, and we appear to have decided that we want to put out the red carpet for him. Do you think that's a wise geopolitical strategy?
I think it's a wise strategy from Britain's point of view, but I would hope the British leadership would tell Trump that he has to change his behavior in the Middle East and, most importantly, put an end to the genocide in Gaza. But Britain has a deep-seated interest in having good relations with the United States, what many Brits would call a special relationship. And furthermore, there's no question that Britain has a deep-seated interest in keeping the United States engaged in Europe. I believe that all European states have a deep-seated interest in keeping the American pacifier in place in Europe. But as I said to you before, the problem is that the United States has a deep-seated interest in getting out of Europe and pivoting to Asia. So I think all for the purposes of keeping the American pacifier in place, the British should roll out the red carpet for Donald Trump. But again, I hope the British leadership has the good sense to put pressure on President Trump, as much pressure as possible, to change his behavior towards Gaza and towards Israeli behavior in the Middle East more generally.
I read, I don't know if it's true, that in the 2020 election, or in 2019, you thought about voting for Bernie Sanders. What do you think is happening in your country domestically at the moment? Is the erosion of institutions and the checks and balances now a determined strategy which effectively is going to turn America into an authoritarian state?
Just quickly, I voted for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton in 2016, and then I voted for Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden in 2020. And in the 2024 election, I wrote in Bernie Sanders' name. So I've been quite consistent in the past 3 presidential elections and who I favored. Of course, it didn't work out very well, but
I mean,
just to be clear, those were my
Bernie
votes.
Sanders has been on an autocracy, anti-autocracy tour. Do you think he's right? That's what's happening.
Yes, I do think he's correct. I think the United States is in deep trouble. I don't know anybody in this country, whether they're on the left or the right or in the center, who disagrees with that assessment. It's very hard to predict where this all leads at this point in time. But when you look at the state of American democracy, it's deeply worrisome. And there I'd make 2 points, Adam. The first is that I think whatever you think of President Trump's policies, I think the fact that there are no checks and balances on him, that there are no guardrails at play here, is a very worrisome situation. He basically could do anything he wants at this point in time, and he does anything he wants, and he says exactly that. In his first term in office from 2017 to 2021, there were real limits on what he could do. There were lots of guardrails, and this frustrated him greatly. And after he was defeated by Biden, he resolved that if he ever got back into the White House, that would not happen again. And that's exactly where we are at. So you have this situation where you have an autocratic leader. I mean, there are just no checks on his behavior.
But I mean, the reasons why they aren't there is because he said about destroying them or removing them. Is that fair? The checks and balances or the guardrails?
Yeah, but to take it a step further, the Democratic Party has self-destructed. Congress has rolled over and played dead. And here we're talking mainly about the Republicans because they control both houses of Congress. And the Supreme Court is filled with people who share his basic political philosophy. So he thumbs his nose at the courts. He can coerce the Republicans into agreeing with almost anything he wants to do. And the Democratic Party is more or less hapless in trying to resist him. So we're in a terrible situation. And again, whether this was a Democratic president or a Republican president, even if Bernie Sanders were trying to do this, I would object greatly. This is not what you want in a democracy. It's very important to have checks and balances. But the second point that I would make to you, Ad, is, did you want to say something? No, the second thing I wanted to say to you is that the country is deeply polarized. We have a real fight between people on the left-hand side of the political spectrum and people on the right-hand side of the political spectrum. And there's remarkably little tolerance embedded in either one of those wings of the political spectrum. And there's a lot of anger, indeed a lot of hatred. And it's therefore hard to get any compromise. And there's not much of a middle left in the United States, because if you're in the middle, there are very powerful forces at play that pull you to either the left or the right. And then when you add to that terrible situation this recent assassination of Charlie Kirk and other examples of violence, one can imagine a situation where large-scale violence, something bordering on a civil war even, breaks out in the United States. I wouldn't argue that that's likely to happen, but it is certainly a real possibility.
What are the forces that you believe are pulling people apart?
Well, you have people in this country who have fundamentally different views about first principles. They have fundamentally different questions about the good life. And this means that they disagree on the role of government in our everyday life. They have fundamentally different views on subjects like abortion, on subjects like immigration. I mean, immigration is a really good example. There are lots of people on the left-hand side of the political spectrum who basically favor open borders. And people on the right reject that out of hand, and they think that open immigration of the sort that Joe Biden encouraged is going to undermine the American body politic. It's going to destroy what America's all about. Those are two fundamentally different views, and they deal with first principles. And as we all know, when first principles are at stake or questions about the good life are at stake, people are often willing to kill each other. This, of course, is why you have a state. You have a state to keep people who disagree on core issues from killing each other. So we better hope the state can...
I mean, it seems to me, looking at it from the outside, that there are things now on the agenda, the domestic agenda, to do with race, to do with sex, men and women, where things that apparently the notion of equality appeared to be settled, but now there are a lot of people really who are saying white men first. Is that fair?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. But that's what I meant when I said that people disagree about first principles or questions of the good life. You put your finger on it. That's just another set of issues. And again, I want to emphasize that people on the far, not on the far left, people on the left and people on the right feel very strongly about these issues. And they tend to view people on the other side as the enemy. And they think that the enemy has to be dealt with in a forceful way. And that's why we're in deep trouble.
So what's going to happen? I mean, is there going to be an end to democracy, a Trump third term, a Trump perpetual term? How's this going to play out, do you think?
Well, I don't think you're going to get a perpetual Trump term in the sense that he's going to run for office again. He's not been making much noise about running for office again. I think he's too old, and I think his health is at a point where another term is not possible. But one could argue if you get J.D. Vance that there won't be much difference between him and Trump. And you can argue that if the Democrats come back to power, you'll get a firebrand on the Democratic side who will go to great lengths to stamp out all of the Republican policies left over from the Trump years, and that this will enrage people on the right and it will fuel the fires. So you can tell all sorts of stories about how this has a very unhappy ending and American democracy is undermined. On the other hand, we do want to emphasize that the roots of American democracy run deep and that the United States has faced major crises before and overcome them. And the American Civil War is, of course, the best example of that. I also remember the 1960s very well, having been a teenager and then a young man throughout the 1960s. That there was a great deal of turmoil in the United States, and sometimes it felt, especially in the year of 1968, like the country was coming apart at the seams. So we've faced trouble before, and fortunately in all those other cases we came through it okay. But sometimes things don't work out well, and the great fear here is that American democracy will be undermined at its core.
Finally, what does it tell you about the differences between our two countries that two friends of Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump and Peter Mandelson, one, a gay man, has lost his job as ambassador, and Donald Trump continues to be president?
I'm not sure what to say. I think Donald Trump is sui generis. Donald Trump, has argued that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't matter. One does have the sense that there's nothing Donald Trump could do that would get him into serious trouble. And Peter Mandelson is a different case. I would imagine if Britain's prime minister had any ties with Jeffrey Epstein, that he'd be out on his ear as well. But with President Trump, it's really quite amazing what he gets away with, because his ties to Jeffrey Epstein are very close. It's really quite remarkable, and it's hurt him in the approval ratings, but not all that much. And nobody's talking about him being removed from office the way Peter Mandelson was pushed aside. So when it comes to President Trump, he is a truly amazing phenomenon. Whatever you think of the substance of his views, or whatever you think of how he governs, I don't think we in this country have ever seen anything like him. And to be honest, I hope we never see anything like him again, because I don't think it's healthy for democracy. Again, as I pointed out before, regardless of what you think of his views, right, his way of governing in a liberal democracy like the United States, in my view, is dangerous.
John Mearsheimer, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
听完米教授的这次专访，感觉他的每一次访谈都信息量很大，值得我们多次推敲。我来聊一聊我的一些想法吧。老实说，米教授这人挺有意思的，他总是用最直白的话，说最尖锐的观点。就像这次，他直接说特朗普的外交政策很难描述，感觉就是在说，其实我也看不懂他在干嘛。这种坦诚还挺罕见的。特别是他作为一个教授的身份，关于乌克兰战争，米教授认为俄罗斯会赢，这个观点其实很争议。不过我觉得吧，战争这种事情，纸面实力只是一方面，人心向背、国际支持，还有那种不服输的精神都很重要。就像乌克兰人到现在还在抵抗，这种意志力是很难用数据衡量的。说到中东，米教授把以色列比作美国脖子上的信天翁，这个比喻真的很形象。但你知道吗？国际关系哪有那么简单？有时候不是纯粹的利益计算，还有历史包袱、情感纽带这些说不清道不明的东西在里面。其实整个访谈我记得最清楚的一个部分就是，他现在对美国的信心太过悲观了。说实话，看最近几年美国的政治撕裂，确实挺让人担忧的。但我总觉得美国这个国家的底子还是很厚的，毕竟经历过那么多风风雨雨都挺过来了，当然也不能太乐观就是了。听米教授讲话有个好处，就是他不会说那些外交辞令，想到什么说什么，这在学者里面还挺少见的。虽然有时候他的观点我不一定同意，但至少知道他是真心这么想的，没有在演戏。 总的来说，这个世界确实越来越复杂了。以前可能还能用简单的框架去理解，现在真的是各种因素交织在一起，谁也说不准下一步会怎样。不过这也是为什么我觉得听不同观点很重要啊。不管是米教授这种现实主义的声音，还是其他角度的分析，都能帮我们更全面地理解这个世界。好啦，今天就聊到这里，你们觉得米教授这个观点怎么样？是不是有些地方让你们印象特别深刻？快来评论区告诉我吧，别忘了给我点个赞，我们下次见。